Jimmy Kimmel's comeback draws a huge TV audience and millions more online. Conservative media figures then flirt with outright violence, talk of killing the homeless and bombing the United Nations, while a suspended comedian points out that's not right. Folks, we talked yesterday about what do you do when the teleprompter doesn't work, right? This case, it wasn't the teleprompter, it was me. We're actually going to just redo the opening. And those of you joining us live, this is a part of what you get. You get to see live mistakes and everything. I share that with my TikTok audience. I share that with YouTube, Facebook. And those of you listening on the podcast, thanks so much for doing so. Let's try it again and see if we can get it. Jimmy Kimmel's comeback draws a huge TV audience and millions more online. Conservative media figures then flirt with outright violence, talk of killing the homeless and bombing the United Nations. A new Quinnipiac poll finds nearly 8 in 10 voters see a political crisis with escalating fears about violence, democracy, and free speech. James Comey is poised to be indicted in what looks like a political payback. And for a palate cleanser, Sit at the Bar September is giving burned out daters a real world way to meet again. All that and more today.
Welcome to Filtered with TJ Walker.
Welcome back. Today is Thursday, September 25th, 2025. Let's take a look at the stock market, how things closed yesterday. The S&P 500 closed at 6,637.97, down 18.95 points or 0.28%. Let's check in at the NASDAQ. That closed at 22,497.86, down 75.62 points or 0.33%. Keep in mind, over the last 25 years, the S&P 500 has returned 7.47% annually, while the NASDAQ Composite has returned 9.73% annually. Think long term. That's the message here. Okay, welcome to Filtered with TJ Walker. What are we about here? This show looks at the top news stories every day, top business stories, technology, culture stories of the day, and then filters it through the lens of communication skills, all with the goal of helping you get better at communication, personal development, so that you can be more successful in your career. My promise to you is if you spend some time with us here each day, you will not just learn about the news, but you'll learn how to improve yourself and how you can actually be more successful. So that's what we're about right here. So let's dive right into story one. Jimmy Kimmel's comeback. Jimmy Kimmel's return hit like a storm. His broadcast averaged 6.2 million viewers, nearly quadruple his usual audience. Meanwhile, his opening monologue has pulled in more than 15 million YouTube views. He was emotional and defiant, reminding viewers a government threat to silence a comedian the president doesn't like is anti-American. Okay, what's the real message here with Jimmy Kimmel coming back and coming back with a huge, huge audience? It is that the people in America still have some voice in things. When they speak out loudly enough, people listen. CEOs of major media companies listen. Even some politicians listen. So, message to Americans, you still have some power. Before every shred of this democracy is torn apart, if you speak out in a forceful way and demand things, you can still get it. Okay, so let's look a little more at some of the details here. 6.2 million viewers for Jimmy Kimmel the night of his return, which if you were Johnny Carson, that would have been depressing. Johnny Carson never had ratings that small. But in the new world we live in, where everything is on demand and everyone has a million TikTok channels they like, 6.2 million is about 6 times bigger than normal. So that is a huge, huge audience. It's especially impressive given 20% of the affiliates that normally carry the channel or the show, said, "Oh, we don't like Jimmy Kimmel. He's not conservative enough for us. He's not politically correct. He's not sufficiently right-wing woke for us. So we're not going to have him on our airways." That's what Sinclair and another collection of stations did. They decided not to air it. And, Trump had mocked Jimmy Kimmel for being low in ratings, and Kimmel said, well, they're not low tonight. He's right on that. Does this solve the long-term problems for late night TV on broadcast networks or Jimmy Kimmel's long-term career situation? No, it doesn't solve that. What we may find is 6 months or a year from now, ABC may come back to Jimmy Kimmel and say, hey, we're either canceling your show or you got to take a 50% pay cut and you got to reduce your head count by 100. That could still happen. Nobody has a problem with that if it's not done because some politician is saying, I don't like what you said. It's okay for a private sector business to allocate resources differently, to fire people occasionally. There's nothing wrong with that. You want that in a democracy and a free market system. What you don't want is politicians saying, oh, you criticized me. I'm a snowflake. You hurt my feelings. Therefore, I want to use the big power of government to shut you down. That's what you don't want. And apparently, I'm not the only one who feels that way. Americans spoke out. They spoke out by watching. They spoke out by canceling their Disney contracts, their Disney channels, their Disney apps. They spoke out in a lot of ways, a lot of angry letters, notes, calls to Disney, the parent company of ABC. And let's give some credit to Bob Iger and ABC and the parent company. They did listen to people. Maybe they did the wrong thing the first time, but they did listen. They did put Jimmy Kimmel back on the air. And what's interesting is how Jimmy Kimmel wove in all the support. He was very gracious in his first night back. And he wove in support he got from Republicans like Ted Cruz and Ben Shapiro, the right-wing commentator, and others. And now we're seeing even more support from people like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is the most popular podcaster, arguably in the world, but certainly in the English-speaking United States part of the world. He's the king. He's someone who did endorse Trump. He's not a liberal op-ed columnist for the New York Times who can simply be dismissed as too liberal of feet and out of touch. It's Joe Rogan, Mr. Muscles, Mr. MMA, Mr. Call It Like I See It, who has tremendous credibility with the base of supporters of Trump. And he's supporting Kimmel. He's condemning these actions of the federal government, the FCC, trying to stifle Jimmy Kimmel. So all in all, the tide has changed a little bit. We're not out of this yet, folks, and we'll talk about later in the show a new survey showing the vast majority of Americans feel like America is coming apart at the seams. But I do feel that this was a good sign. This shows that the entire country is not going to just roll over and play dead. We're not all going to be possums saying, yeah, we're dead, kick me again, run over me again. I won't notice, I won't complain. No, people did speak up. And, is Jimmy Kimmel the greatest cause in the world? No. And he rightly pointed out on his first monologue back, his show's not important. He said that. I give him tremendous credit for that. He had grace in class. He pointed out, but it is important to live in a democracy that allows a show like his. Very, very well stated on Kimmel's part. And is this going to solve the problems in the long run? I don't know for ABC News, but it's going to solve, I think, one problem that the government that tries to shut down comedians using the ham-fisted approach of we're going to take away your licenses is going to get a lot of blowback. not just from liberals and Democrats and centrists and the so-called left, the 5 people who are a part of the left in certain precincts in Manhattan, but from people like Joe Rogan. And it's going to be too hard for this administration to ignore the wishes, the concerns, the political sentiments of not just Joe Rogan, but the people who like him and support him and listen to him. I'm TJ Walker. This is Filtered. This is this news show where you get analysis from a sensible, sane centrist. And I'm going to display that in just a moment by attacking a lot of different sides. So if you feel like I'm saying something you like and agree with, hang on. You're going to hear something in a moment where you think, well, I don't really agree with that. Can TJ say that? Well, yes, I can say that. And you're going to have a hard time kicking me off the airways or getting my contract with ABC canceled because I don't have a contract with ABC. All this and more coming up today on Filtered. Back in a moment.
Filtered is brought to you by the following. Want to advertise here? You better be legit. No crypto, no junk food, no supplements. Go to tjwalker.com/advertise. Want to become a better speaker, leader, or communicator? Start with the TJ Walker Success Library. It's 5 of my most practical books, covering everything from public speaking to media interviews and persuasive messaging, all for only $9.95. I've trained presidents and Fortune 500 CEOs, and now you can get the same wisdom in a fast, affordable format. Go to tjwalker.com/books and download your copies instantly. Thanks for listening. If you like today's episode, you'll love my online courses at MediaTrainingWorldwide.com. Check them out now and level up your skills.
And we are back. Welcome. I'm TJ Walker. This is Filtered. Issue 2. Violence gets a pass. Jokes get punished. Fox News hosts are now openly musing about violence, and no one in government seems to care. Yet when Jimmy Kimmel cracked a joke that bruised conservatives' feelings but didn't call for violence, Disney suspended him. Brian Kilmeade said recently on Fox and Friends that homeless people should be killed. Jesse Waters, one of their primetime stars, went further this week, telling viewers the United Nations building in New York should be bombed, even gassed. He even talked about demolishing the building entirely. These remarks were met with chuckles from co-hosts, not condemnation from regulators. Now, compare that to Jimmy Kimmel. Let's not forget his actual line that got him suspended was about not Charlie Kirk, but about the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk and political supporters of the president. Kimmel said, quote, "We hit some new lows, desperately trying to characterize this kid as anything other than one of them." Please note, there was nothing in that sentence that was calling for bombing, killing, or threatening of violence. But it hurt some people's feelings. Okay, what's the real message here? The message our government is sending out right now is, if you are a conservative and you want to attack some liberal or organization, you can do it in prime time and no one's going to say anything about it. You can be a Fox News host and talk about killing homeless people, bombing the United Nations, and oh, that's just a chuckle. You don't even mention that. But if you are a non-conservative comedian or politician and you dare make fun of something that someone could perceive as critical of MAGA or dear leader, the great orange one, well, that's the same thing as violence, and that needs to be put out of business, and you've lost your job. Now, folks, this is just, let's go a little deeper here. This is an absurdity. This is an absurdity where Fox News commentators, literally calling for bombing the United Nations. And what was the offense? The offense was Donald Trump had to walk up steps. That was the justification. Donald Trump was at the United Nations earlier this week and an escalator broke. And Trump being Trump, he of course had to complain about it, whine about it incessantly in an hour-long speech to the United Nations. That and the fact that his teleprompter didn't work. He had to whine and whine and whine about it. And Jesse Waters, wanting to carry the water for Trump as always, said, hey, you know what? The UN is so bad, let's bomb it or gas it. Now, let me remind folks that the United Nations is based in Midtown Manhattan, one of the most populated places in the world. So if you were to bomb the United Nations, you would kill thousands, maybe tens of thousands of human beings. It would be another 9/11 all over again, although this time it was a call to action from a prominent conservative, MAGA-loving member of the mainstream media. And I hate to tell you, after 30 years of #1 ratings, Fox News Channel is mainstream, like it or not. And yet, where's Brendan Carr when you need him? Why isn't Brendan Carr calling up Rupert Murdoch and saying, hey, we can do this the hard way or the easy way? You've got someone openly advocating violence and terrorism on your airways. Why don't you get rid of him now before I take away your broadcast licenses? Don't hear Brendan Carr saying that. Now, I'm not advocating he does that, but if you really are serious about saying we don't want people in prominent media positions making calls for violence, you can make that position, and it's something you could clearly articulate, and it's defensible. What's not defensible is saying somebody criticized me, and I could interpret it in a way that it makes me feel bad, even if it's accurate. And therefore, I want to call that terrorism, because that essentially is what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. Now, I spent a lot of time on this show, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to do it again, analyzing in explicit detail exactly what Jimmy Kimmel said. Because I think most liberals are getting it wrong. Most mainstream media commentators are getting it wrong. Most comedians are getting it wrong. What Jimmy Kimmel said was, this is in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. First of all, the first thing he said was condolences and sympathies to the Kirk family. He was entirely gracious. And that was the first thing he ever put out in the media. But the quote that supposedly was worse than calling on killing people or bombing a very crowded building, which is what conservatives in media at Fox News Channel have done this week. What Kimmel said is, we hit some new lows. Okay. You could argue that, oh no, things have been lower before. Maybe things were lower in the Civil War, but that's, being, splicing that and picking that apart. No honest person would say there's anything offensive about that, or that couldn't be defended at some level. People are desperately trying to characterize this kid as anything other than one of them, MAGA supporters. So, first of all, he didn't say that the Kirk killer was a MAGA supporter. Now, I can certainly understand why someone might perceive it that way when you look at some facts, but that's not what Jimmy Kimmel said. So you can't say he was portraying the killer as a MAGA supporter. What he's saying is that MAGA supporters and Trump supporters were desperately trying to characterize this kid as anything other than one of them, which is 100% true. They went out of their way to say he's a part of the left, a part of the left, a part of the left. He's influenced by the left. So yes, they actually were desperately trying to portray this kid as anything other than one of them. Now, I think I've been fairer than anyone in the media on this issue. I spent a whole show basically showing here's fact after fact after fact after fact that could make an honest, open-minded person conclude that indeed this alleged killer of Kirk was influenced by left-wing cultural forces. But I also outline a dozen facts that could make an open-minded person conclude he's very much shaped by a conservative, right-wing, gun-loving, eye for an eye, vengeance, mega culture. I also, since I'm fair and a sensible centrist, showed how there's all sorts of other factors that are perhaps a bigger influence. The fact that he's a young white male in America without a job and few friends who plays video games may have had a bigger influence on what drove him to this act of barbarity. So I'm frustrated, frankly, that so many people across the spectrum are not actually analyzing what these comedians are saying and what these news commentators at Fox are saying. Because so many on the right just say, Jimmy Kimmel said this awful, awful thing that was filled with hatred. There's no hatred in pointing out simple facts. And if you can do it with comedic effect, even better. So you've got everyone on the right acting like automatically it's assumed what Jimmy Kimmel said was beyond the pale. I'm here to tell you it wasn't beyond the pale. It was accurate and funny, at least to some people. And I got a beef with a lot of the mainstream media and even comedians who say, well, you know, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't really accurate. He wasn't completely fair, but he should still have the right to. That's wrong too. There's nothing you can go through word by word of what he said, and there's nothing factually inaccurate. There's certainly nothing that's a call to violence. Now, a lot of people like to pretend they are free speech absolutist and believe in free speech, but then you give the example of, okay, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that creates a dangerous environment where people can be trampled to death and die. So every fair-minded, logical person realizes there are some limits to freedom of speech. The question is, what is it going to be? And certainly most broadcasters historically have taken the position, we don't want people on our airwaves actively calling for violence and terrorism. We don't want that. And if Jimmy Kimmel had actually called for violence, I'd be the first one saying, okay, ABC, maybe it is time to get rid of it. But that's not what he did. And yet we see actual explicit calls for violence on Fox News Channel from Jesse Waters, Brian Kilmeade. And Brian Kilmeade, to his credit, did apologize. Still, why have we not heard any calls for their ouster by Brendan Carr, since he's supposedly so concerned about safety for Americans and terrorism and trying to avoid deaths of Americans? The hypocrisy is just utterly overwhelming. Look, all sorts of people can be hypocrites. There's nothing novel there, but to this extreme, to just state boldly, oh, I don't like this comedian because they made fun of somebody I like. They are therefore calling for violence. Therefore, we have to force them out of a job. When none of that's true. And then say, oh, here's someone I do like who criticizes things I like to criticize. And they're literally calling for violence. They're literally calling for people to be put to death and bombed. And that's okay because they're going after people I don't like. That just rubs too many Americans the wrong way, regardless of whether you consider yourself on the left, on the right, or a sensible centrist, which is exactly where I am. More in a moment. We'll be right back after this break. Want more? Grab my 5-book success library for $9.95 at tjwalker.com/books. It's the fastest way to level up your communication. Imagine being the most confident person in the room,
whether you're on Zoom or on stage. That's what thousands of professionals are learning to do right now through my online communication courses. At Media Training Worldwide, you can access my complete training library on demand, affordable, and actually effective. Whether you're preparing for media interviews, client presentations, or TED-style talks, I've got you covered. Check it out, MediaTrainingWorldwide.com. You'll never wing it again.
Issue 3, new polling data, Americans see crisis. Nearly 8 in 10 voters say the United States is in the middle of a political crisis. That's according to the new Quinnipiac University national poll released this week. The poll found that 79% of registered voters see the country in crisis, including overwhelming majorities of Democrats and independents, and even 60% of Republicans. Concerns about politically motivated violence are rising sharply. 71% of voters now call it a very serious problem, up from just over half in June. Majority also believes the situation will only get worse in the years ahead. There's pessimism, too, about free speech and democracy itself. 53% of voters now say they doubt freedom of speech is being protected, a reversal from earlier this year. And by a 53 to 41% margin, voters say American democracy is not working. Quinnipiac's Tim Malloy summed it up. A shudder of concern and pessimism rattles a broad swath of the electorate. Okay, what's the real message here? Polling data is kind of telling us what we all already know, which is most Americans are concluding our democracy isn't working. Things are tearing apart. Are we ready to have a full-fledged civil war? No, I hope not. But everyday life is becoming less civil every single day. Let's dig a little bit deeper. One of the issues is, I believe, most voters feel like they're not being listened to because the vast, vast majority of voters in the country today are not in favor of these tariffs. Now, you could say to someone who voted for a Democratic candidate or an independent candidate for president, hey, tough luck, them's the breaks, that's how politics works. Your guy, your gal didn't win. You got to accept what the winner did. But here's the problem. The majority of Republicans these days are not supportive of these tariffs. And that's just one example. And the tariffs are wreaking havoc on our economy. It's pushing inflation up in a lot of sectors. It's completely destroying the lives of soybean farmers in the upper Midwest and causing all sorts of unintended consequences and negative spillover effects in other industries. And most people feel like, well, what can we do? We can't do anything. And traditionally, you'd say, well, of course you can, because you have to have support for something like this, because the Congress has to ratify tariffs. Well, the Congress is rolling over and playing dead. They're saying whatever dear leader wants, at least the majority members of each chamber are saying, we're not going to question it. We're not going to assert our constitutional role of making legislation, of ratifying tariffs. We're just going to let dear leader do whatever he wants. And we're going to pretend that everyone's okay with the idea of this being an autocracy. And we're going to, because we don't want a mean tweet from the big orange one. We don't like all the people showing up with weaponry at our homes. So we're just going to roll over and play dead. That's what's happened to the United States Congress. And that has enabled dear leader to do whatever he wants. And that's what you're seeing in this poll. Again, 79% of registered voters see the country in a crisis. And democracy simply is not working. Now, in fairness, our founders didn't set up a democracy, complete democracy. It's this convoluted republic with an electoral college. It does make you wonder what would ever happen if I mean, just imagine if Hillary Clinton had won the Electoral College in 2016 and Trump had won the popular vote. Well, we don't really have to imagine what would happen. We pretty much know. It would have been a January 6th times 1,000. He would not have accepted that. His supporters would not have accepted that. They would have forced a changing of the rules, if not a complete dissolution of our Constitution and starting over. But we have one side that does have fealty to the rules, to the Constitution, and they say, hey, we might not like this whole Electoral College thing, but that's what we've got, and we have to follow the Constitution. At some point, this country is going to have to deal with the fact that people want democracy. We're not living in 1776 or 1789 anymore. We don't live in a time where a few wealthy landowners can travel by horseback, once a year and have a monopoly of all the information and ideas and insights about proposed legislation. And the rest of us are so busy digging ditches and planting corn, we'll never even know about it. We don't live in those times anymore. And what is abundantly obvious to most Americans when they watch their elected officials speak on TV, they do not have a sense of, wow, this is a true statesman. This person is truly elite. This person is clearly representative of the best we have. They're smarter than I am, more. Nobody feels that about elected officials of any party right now. When people see their elected official on TV, on TikTok, on YouTube, they either think, okay, this person is a complete boob, or they think, okay, this person is doing some things I like. This person seems like they're honestly trying to make things better, but they're not any smarter than I am. And they're just a regular person grappling with this. So the mystique and the awe, the sense that the average person couldn't possibly be as wise as the governors or the electors in the Electoral College, that's gone. You can't sell that idea anymore. So at some point, this country is going to have to deal with that. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the filibuster recently ending. Again, at some point, if you believe in democracy, majority should rule. And I certainly realize there are going to be times when the Democrats are going to want to stop some legislation. The only way they can do that is with a filibuster. And now it looks like it might not happen because Republicans have said, filibusters were great when we were in the minority, but now that we're running things, not so much. So where do we go with this polling data? Let's not forget that the states are not neatly divided where everyone in Florida is a Republican and everyone in New York is a Democrat. No, it's not like that in America. And it's certainly not aligned the way businesses in the South, dependent on slavery, had one interest in the Civil War, and businesses in the North had different economic interests. There's no clear-cut cleavage to pull the country apart. There are Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives and centrists in every state, in every city, in every neighborhood, and sometimes in every single house. So while it's all well and good to talk about civil war, as a practical matter, it's very hard to start fighting with someone who might actually be sleeping in your bedroom, because the political divisions are often divided not by states, but often even by gender. I mean, the sheer number of men, especially white men, people who look like me, who just automatically are now voting for Trump every chance they get. The numbers there are very different than white women, for example. So there's a gender difference. And do we really want more of a civil war among the genders when there's a million other things they could talk about and fight about? So Polling like this is a way of communication. It is the way for the public to communicate. And believe me, politicians of all stripes listen to polls. Politicians in authoritarian regimes listen to polls because they are always fearful of the power of the masses. And that's part of what has got this administration a little scared this week regarding the pushback on Jimmy Kimmel, because they've not gotten a lot of pushback on a number of their more extremist initiatives in the last 9 months. So politicians listen to polls. They don't always do what a poll says. I mean, polls will tell you the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats do not favor tax cuts for the wealthy. But one party says, you know what? We don't really have to listen to them on that poll because we can talk about this shiny object over here. We can say, oh, don't worry about the fact that we're increasing your taxes and giving these billionaires hundreds of millions of tax cuts, because let's talk about the 5 transgender athletes competing in the entire country, and that'll really scare you and get you diverted. So it's not that polls always are translated into public policy, but they are listened to. So if a pollster calls you, you might not want to just hang up. Coming back after the break, we'll be looking at the sad saga of former FBI Director James Comey. Filtered is brought to you by the following. Get the deeper takes I don't post anywhere else. Subscribe now at substack.com/@TJWalkerSuccess and stay in the loop. For years, people have asked how they could get one-on-one coaching from me inexpensively. Well, now you can, anytime, anywhere with the TJ Walker AI clone. It's like having me in your pocket, ready to help you prep for a speech, polish a pitch, or calm your nerves before a big meeting. You talk to it. It responds like I would, based on my real-world coaching of thousands of leaders and communicators. Check it out at tjwalker.ai. It's not just smart, it's personal. The Comey indictment looks like political payback. Former FBI Director James Comey is reportedly about to be indicted in Virginia federal court. MSNBC says charges could be filed in the coming days, possibly for illegally lying to Congress about leaks in 2016. But here's the problem. Justice Department guidelines say you should only bring a case if you can realistically win a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Multiple prosecutors have said there isn't enough evidence against Comey. In fact, the interim U.S. attorney handling the case just resigned rather than going along. His replacement is a lawyer who previously represented President Trump personally. Comey has been a top Trump target since the day he was fired. The timing, the charges, and the personal changes make this look less like justice and more like a political hit on an old enemy. Comey's role in 2016 remains one of the most controversial in modern political history. I'll be talking more about that in just a moment. But what's the real message here? If the FBI actually indicts James Comey, it sends a clear-cut message. We are no longer a nation of laws. We are just stooges. We are henchmen to the thug in chief who will use the full force of our guns and our power to punish anyone who ever criticizes him. That's what this is about. Let's dig a little deeper. Now, this Comey character is, he's really one of the more bizarre characters in American history, if you follow him. He's involved in a lot. Having said that, do I think he should go to prison just because he criticized Donald Trump? No. But I'm not going to be very sad for him personally to see his life ruined, frankly. I'm not wishing him any physical harm. But James Comey, in my opinion, has done more to damage this country than really anyone since Ralph Nader in 2000, when his vanity campaign completely swung the election from Al Gore, who won millions of more votes than George W. Bush. but Bush ended up winning because of Nader. Although Nader, I think, did it for pure reasons, he still ended up changing history. Comey is despicable in a very, very different way. So a little history. Going into the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, he reopened the Clinton email probe 11 days before the election. He announced it at a press conference going in just the weekend before the last week of the campaign. This is not what the FBI has ever done. They have been scrupulously trying to stay above the political fray throughout their entire history. They had formal policies that if it's like 90 days before an election, we don't want our fingerprints on this, making it look like we're trying to influence elections. And yet Comey did this. And he did it in a way where he basically said, look, we got nothing on Clinton. We can't really charge her with anything, but I got to give some red meat to all the conservative congressmen who have been telling me I have to indict her. So I will go ahead and criticize her and trash her and say she was reckless, when in fact, everything she did with her email server was thoroughly vetted by attorneys, and she had sound legal opinions saying what she was doing was 100% sound. Furthermore, there's never been any evidence that any information she put out there or was on her private server was used in any inappropriate way. And yet Comey basically trashed her, gave credence to the idea that she was somehow, out of control and doing something bizarre. It turns out all the Republicans were doing this too, before and after, sending emails on private phones and private servers. She actually did nothing different from what almost anyone else did, except for the fact that she tried to have more security. She actually had servers built on her home so that she could maintain better security. And for that, he had to trash her, vilify her. And you could say, well, TJ, that's only one thing. Elections are big. That couldn't have possibly swayed the election. May I remind you that the 2016 election was decided by 77,744 votes. Trump only won the Electoral College by, and everyone forgets she had millions of more actual votes than Trump did. But yes, he did win the Electoral College, but it was a difference of 77,744 votes spread out over Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So something like this, where she was gaining momentum, all the polls showed she was going to win. And then you have the FBI director who, let's face it, at least back then, that was a position that most Americans, certainly independent voters, centrist voters, thought, well, this is a serious person. This is not some political hack. This is not Sean Hannity. This is a serious person. He's telling me Hillary Clinton did all these awful things. You can't persuade me that out of a country of 300 million people back then, I realize not that many voters, that couldn't have swayed 77,000. Now, here's what makes it so much worse. At the same time, Comey and the FBI were investigating Trump for all of his numerous ties to Russia. Did he mention that? No. Did he hold a press conference saying, it sure makes sense to think that maybe Russia is trying to influence this election, given the fact that Trump never seems to criticize Russian leaders and Putin? Sure seems like he's in their pocket. Sure, a lot of smart people who say, deals were done in the past. Did he hold a press conference and say that? No, I'm not saying he should have, But you can't hold a press conference 11 days before the election, trash one candidate, when the reality is there's a much more serious investigation going on about a much more serious crime about another, and not a peep. That's what Comey did. So what he should have done is, what he really should have done is not mentioned anything about Hillary Clinton or Trump. But if he was going to talk about her, he should have talked about him as well. Why did he do this? Because he is a weak, craven political hack who likes to think of himself as Mr. Honest, upstanding Justice, Mr. Justice. He did it because so many Republicans were screaming bloody murder that he was covering up for Hillary Clinton and that he was doing the work of the Democrats. So he did this to make conservative Republicans happy. That's what he did. So, the real lesson here, I hate to say it, but people who complain the most often get what they want. It's the old cliche, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And in this case, wow, did the Republicans with their conspiracy mongering, did they, boy, oh boy, did they get their grease. They got an election essentially handed to them by playing this grievance card. So that's a little background on Comey. So is it an atrocity if he gets indicted? Yes. Should he actually be convicted and sent to prison? No. If we continue to evolve away from a constitutional democracy and just turn into an autocracy where those out of favor are pushed off balconies or suddenly OD, even though they've never been known to use drugs, or end up in a gulag somewhere forever, and it happens to Comey, I'm not a big believer in karma, but I can certainly imagine how other people who do would find that an interesting state of affairs. I'm TJ Walker. This is Filtered, where every day we look at and I mean every day, I mean 7 days a week, we look at the top stories of the day, business stories, technology, economic stories, and cultural stories, and then filter it through the lens of communication skills. That's what we're all about. Back in a moment. Filtered is brought to you by the following. You don't need a new degree. You don't need another expensive coach. You need the right communication habits, and I'll teach them to you in just a few minutes a day. At MediaTrainingWorldwide.com, I've created the most comprehensive library of online communication and personal development courses anywhere. You'll learn public speaking, media training, persuasion, executive presence, and more. These are the same methods I've taught to world leaders, but now they're affordable and accessible to everyone. You can start for free and upgrade anytime. Go now to MediaTrainingWorldwide.com. Confidence isn't a personality trait, it's a skill, and it's trainable. Okay, enough politics. Let's get Comey off the screen here, and let's talk about more enjoyable things and fun things. And believe it or not, I don't want to be talking about politics most of the time on this show. Sometimes it just injects itself. So let's go far away from politics right now. It is Sit at the Bar September. Believe it or not, there is a new dating trend sweeping New York, and it doesn't involve swiping. There's an influencer, Lori Cooper. She's launched Sit at the Bar September. It's a thing, apparently, urging singles to ditch the apps and look for love in person. And that can mean sitting at a restaurant or a bar, even alone. Cooper is a longtime New York real estate broker who has turned herself into a local celebrity. She has 138,000 Instagram followers, a growing TikTok presence, and she posts nightlife tips every single night. She goes out 7 nights a week. And her recent video telling people to meet at bars instead of on apps has been viewed hundreds of thousands of times, sparking national media attention. Bars are embracing the campaign, and singles are giving it a try. One woman, this is cited in a New York Times story about this whole phenomenon. Met a man in a bar only to have him show up for her Pilates class the next morning and take her out again afterwards. Others say it's revived the movie-like thrill of chance encounters, something apps have drained from modern dating. As one participant put it, that romantic movie-like vibe, meeting people you wouldn't meet on an app, is refreshing. Okay, what's the real message here? If you want to use a dating app, fine. But sometimes you need to put the phone down, leave it at home, and go out in the real world. That means sitting in a restaurant and smiling at a stranger, or a bar doing it. That can be the best way to meet someone, perhaps having a meaningful relationship. So mix it up a little. Not everything has to be sitting at home, swipe, 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 swipe. Let's dig a little deeper here. Now, I've been married a long time, and so if you see someone who looks like me at 9 o'clock sitting in a bar, it's not me, because I'm asleep by then. That may sound lame, but it is true. But I do think that this is true of any technology. Anytime a new technology comes around, you don't necessarily want to throw away the old technology. Movies came out. It didn't mean no one ever wanted to listen to radio again. Cable TV came out. Didn't mean no one ever wanted to watch broadcast TV anymore. People were watching Jimmy Kimmel on broadcast TV. So my big recommendation to anyone is try to use every form of technology possible. But one of the best technologies is the low-tech way, actually having a human conversation with someone. Now, in the article about this phenomenon of Sit at the Bar September, what it talks about, some of the interviews are people saying, this actually saves time, because if you meet someone in real life, you can tell right away if there's chemistry. And I think what they meant is do you even find the person attractive? Because you can make anyone look good in a picture on a dating app. And you can also have people have pictures that was 20 years ago and about 80 pounds ago. If you're meeting someone in real life at a bar or a restaurant or a nightclub, you actually can see what they look like. You can see if they are attractive. Am I asking you to be more superficial and just judge people on their looks? No, I'm not asking you that, but let's not kid ourselves. That is a part of dating, at least from what I remember. There needs to be some kind of initial attraction to want to go out on a date or a second date with someone. You can tell that pretty instantly if you meet them in real life. If you're swipe, 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 text, 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 text for 3 weeks, sometimes there can be this huge buildup and this anticipation. You meet them in person and you're like, ugh, I'm more attracted to this pen than I am this human being. So I think, again, I'm not single. I'm not out at bars late at night because I'm asleep. But if you are single and you are trying to actively meet potential romantic partners, I'm not saying it has to be a bar, but I think this idea, I wouldn't want to meet anyone at a bar. That's got to be bad. Those are bad people. Guess what? They're the very same people who are online. Pretty much anyone you've ever met online has been to a bar. So to just have a blanket concept of anyone you meet in a bar is bad, that's really no different than saying, well, anyone you meet online is bad. There was a time 25 years ago when there was a real stigma to meeting someone online. Now it's almost embarrassing if you tell someone you didn't meet your spouse online. And for the record, I did meet my spouse in real life at a restaurant/bar, I guess you would call it, in Midtown Manhattan. A completely serendipitous action. And now we're still together. So is that perfect for everyone? No. But I think putting all your eggs in one basket, which is what most people are doing with these apps, sleep, 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 that is putting all your eggs in one basket. So I applaud this woman, this influencer, who's trying to spread this phenomenon. And I don't think it's significant that it's at a bar. I don't think it's significant that it's September, but Sit at the Bar September is a nice, catchy thing for social media. What I'm also interested by is this influencer, Lori Cooper, she's not a child, shall we say. I mean, she appears to be in at least her 70s, maybe older. So I'm giving her a lot of credit, A, for having the energy to go out regularly, B, learning social media, C, getting excited about sharing her ideas with people and using media and actually creating a phenomenon and having a huge TikTok and Instagram followers. So it's easy to get into this habit of thinking, well, if you want to be big on Instagram or TikTok, you got to be incredibly beautiful and 19 years old and wiggle around. Yeah, some people are. But here's a woman who would appear to be old enough to be, if not my mother, at least my older sister. And she's killing it on social media. She's having an impact. So I urge you to check her out. Laurie, Laurie Cooper. You may want to check her out on social media. So I wanted to end our regular segment talking about something a little more lighthearted, because it is frankly annoying and depressing to obsess over political news, and that's not the focus of this show. Now, the other thing we do in this show is have a grab bag section where there's certain topics that come up where I don't really want to devote a whole segment to it, but I don't want to let it pass either. So this is kind of back to the beginning of the show, and it is about politics. There's simply nothing I can do. There was another shooting in the United States yesterday in Dallas. It happened at an ICE facility. So a lot of bloodshed continuing in America. At least one person is dead, 2 are injured. Almost immediately after this happened, Vice President J.D. Vance came out swinging and trying to say this is another example of left-wing extremism. Left-wing extremism. Does he have any proof? Well, apparently there was something on the casing of anti-ICE written on a bullet. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but that is being reported. So if that is the case, that certainly doesn't sound like something a MAGA supporter would put. Here's the big problem. We are seeing people instantly wanting to make judgments anytime there's a crisis. And someone's killed, they instantly say it's left-wing extremist. And occasionally, I haven't seen much of it, but occasionally people say, well, it's a right-wing extremist. When maybe the real problem is we give out guns in this country like they're candy at Halloween. We give out guns so freely to any idiot, any nut. So we worry about things like, oh my gosh, there were 5 trans athletes who competed in female sports in America last year. We spent all our time on that. 47,000 people murdered and shot and killed to death. Oh, we can't talk about that. Not news, not interesting. Got to have guns first, Second Amendment. So it is a bit bizarre what our country decides to focus on and not deal with real issues. Australia, great country. I've been there. They had a mass shooting a number of years ago, and they said, you know what? We don't have to continue down this path. We don't have to be like America. And they passed massive gun control legislation, and their deaths from guns plummeted. So that does lead me to an issue here, because we are seeing, again, not just with the Charlie Kirk alleged assassin, but with this most recent incident in Dallas this week, this instant leap to it's a left-wing extremist. Never mind the fact that the vast, vast majority of political deaths, assassinations in this country are committed by people who clearly were motivated by right-wing ideologies. No serious person who's looked at the data would contend anything different. You could certainly make the case, as I have, that the Kirk assassin may have had some right-wing influences, but also some left-wing influences, and also some influences that are just crazy, bizarre about living in America, where people are taught to love guns and to shoot them and to seek vengeance. So a lot of different influences there. I do think that J.D. Vance is a particularly despicable for instantly trying to profit politically from this death and using this as a context to, I've said it before, I've said it several times this week, I'll say it again. We are seeing the Republicans, from Stephen Miller, from J.D. Vance to Trump himself, marching down this road where they're getting closer and closer to saying it's not just left-wing groups, it's any Democrat. Stephen Miller said it clearly at the Kirk Memorial this past weekend, where he said the Democratic Party is a terrorist organization. Well, I don't think we're that far away from this government trying to outlaw the Democratic Party. And that could include things like imprisoning its top leaders. I know that sounds extreme. No one said it yet, but when you look at how the dots are being connected and how the Overton window is shifting every day on what is considered acceptable and what's considered beyond the pale, I think it's highly likely. I hope I'm wrong. I made this prediction beginning of the week, and I said I predict within 6 months we could see the Democratic Party in the United States outlawed by the federal government. I hope I'm wrong. I absolutely hope that that is one prediction where I am completely wrong. So this instant categorizing every death, I'm glomming onto anything, something on a casing. It also makes it very susceptible to being spun, because if you are a law enforcement official and you consider yourself pro-MAGA, pro-Trump, and someone has been killed and you're there at the crime scene, there's going to be a lot of temptation to say, hey, let me just write this marking on this bullet, and then it's going to make the people we don't like look bad because they probably are behind it anyway. I'm not alleging that that's happened, but I'm saying in the current environment where the second there is a death like this, partisan players are coming in looking to latch on to anything they can to score a cheap political point to say, see, it's the other team that's out to kill us. It's only escalating. And here's the great irony. Yes, there was a time when the so-called left in the United States was violent in the 1960s. There were bombings. There were genuine radicals in the United States associated with the political left. And they threw Molotov cocktails. And they were part of the underground. And they did bombings and the Weathermen. Yes, so there was a genuine violent left in the United States when I was an itty-bitty baby. We're talking about the early 60s. So that history is there. But what have we heard again and again and again from Sean Hannity and everyone at Fox and Jesse Waters and J.D. Vance and Trump forever? What we've been hearing nonstop for the last 40 years is those Democrats, those people on the left, they're such pansies and wimps and babies, and they want to take away all of our guns. And they think guns are... Ugh. We've been told that again and again and again. And in fact, I happen to know a lot of people on the left, and every single one of them I know, if I handed them a gun, and I don't own a gun, they'd be like, ugh, what do I do with that? Take it away. That would be their attitude. So the idea that there's a radical, violent left in America, in active cells, in organized ways, in an organized party, is an absolute absurdity. And it goes completely against everything conservatives have been telling us for the last 40 years. I mean, according to most conservatives, the biggest problem with Democrats and liberals and progressives is they don't like guns. Well, if you don't like guns and you don't ever use them, how are you now going to be violent, committing all of these atrocities? It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Now, again, could someone have some left-wing ideas, some right-wing ideas, and live in a family where everybody has a gun and they were taught how to use a gun, and you put them together in a way where they do some atrocity, and there's a lot of different influences? Absolutely. That's absolutely possible. But what I just said there is complex. That's not going to get retweeted. This video is not going to get 1 million views because I said the honest thing, which is it's complex, the motivations of any one murderer, any one assassin. They could have a combination of right-wing influences, left-wing influences, and other influences that have nothing to do with right-left ideology. That's not a soundbite. It doesn't instantly make someone say, oh, TJ really hit the guys I don't like. He made me feel good, so now I'm going to share his video. I'm okay with that. What I'm trying to do is share with you the truth as I see it, and to filter the news through the lens of communication skills and personal development skills. That's what we're about right here. Thanks so much for watching today. If you got any value out of this, anything you liked, anything you didn't like, please leave a comment on whatever format you're consuming this in, whether it's an audio podcast, whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, wherever you are. I'm happy you spent a little time with me today. Leave some feedback, post questions. You think I got something wrong? You want to make fun of me for messing up my own teleprompter read at the beginning? That's okay. I won't try to have you banned, and I won't remove your comments. Thanks so much. I'll see you tomorrow.